Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, an island show that likes to stretch its wings and fly from issue to issue as we bring you as many issues as we possibly can during the tenure of this program. I'm Robin Adair, and flying along with me, my wingman, the Croatian sensation, the host with the most, John Jurisic. And John, what's on your mind?
Robin, there's so much going on out there. Hard to nail it all down. What do we pick? What do we chat about? Well, we're trying to put more into the show, chunk it in there. A lot of stuff's coming out, so let's get going. Why don't we start on the other side of the planet, where Iran has been firing drones and missiles at Israel. By all accounts, 99% of the drones and missiles fired from Iran were intercepted. I think it might even be higher than that, with only a handful of the 120 ballistic missiles making it to Israeli airspace, causing minor damage. This all in retaliation for Israel attacking the Iranian embassy in Syria, where they say Hamas operations were being supported. This certainly cannot be a welcome escalation of this conflict.
No kidding, John. And we have a response. We have a response from Victoria podcaster Ryan Painter, who depicts himself as a classical liberal and a Christian Zionist. And in short, he strongly believes in Israel's right to exist as a nation. And he is critical at the moment of the NDP and their fulsome support of all things Hamas. And that includes the invasion. There was a lot of celebrating going on in Canadian streets when the Hamas attacked Israel back in October, killed a lot of people and took a lot of hostages. And as far as Ryan Painter is concerned, Israel deserves the chance to be a nation. It's not excluding Palestine becoming a nation itself and having its own say in its own affairs, but there's a question of driving Israel from the river, the Jordan River, to the sea. And as far as Ryan Painter says, that's a no-go. Let's zoom him in. And now joining us in the Rumble Room for the very first time is a podcaster from the very famous Ryan Painter Show and a strategic planner and consultant, Ryan Painter. Welcome to the show.
Very famous Robin. I hope that this is you being clairvoyant, because certainly at this point, I don't think I'm very famous yet, but it will happen. Thank you.
Well, now that you're on the Rumble Room, you're on the way. You're on the way.
There we go. So, that's right. Baby steps.
Okay. Well, right from the start, I'd like to comment on the fact you've been willing to wade into some pretty thorny issues on social media, aside from your podcast. And you're not afraid to speak your mind, which is kind of refreshing in this day and age. You call yourself, at times at least, a Christian Zionist, and you stand by Israel's right to exist. So what's your view right now on the war in the Gaza as it stands? And now we've had this threat of an escalation with these missiles fired out of Iran. What's your read on all of that?
So my read on all of that is, October 7th was all at once a horrible day and an incredibly galvanizing moment. It was a time when Israel faced its worst massacre, the worst incursion, the worst loss of life since the Holocaust. And at the same time, you saw a tremendous groundswell of support behind Israel. Now, it didn't last very long, unfortunately, where you actually ended up having folks who were ostensibly on the left, whether they be union leaders, whether they be elected politicians from the left of the spectrum across the country, but certainly in the NDP federally, who took it upon themselves to take this crisis as an opportunity to try to leverage what was happening to further bludgeon Israel and really, carry water for Hamas. I mean, you can't look at the resolution that the NDP brought to the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago as anything less than a gift for Hamas. So to answer your question, Robin, I look at the situation as one where those of us who are of the moderate, pragmatic type, most Canadians, need to be as resiliently undeterred to support our ally, our only democratic ally in the region as we possibly can. Israel is a nation that for 75 years has withstood a barrage of assaults that have essentially tried to not just wipe Israel off the map, but has really sought to annihilate Jews. These folks who are attacking, whether it's Iran, whether it's Qatar, it doesn't matter who it is, they want Israel gone, they want Jews gone. And this is the only nation in the world that is solely, exclusively, specifically for Jews. And it's not very big. I don't know how many of your listeners know how big Israel is. It's about the size of half of Vancouver Island, maybe not much bigger, not much smaller. It's not a big place. And it deserves to exist. It has a right to exist. And Israel has the right to defend itself. And the fact that we have political parties, we have elected leaders, political leaders in this country that sop to the radical extremists, not just on university campuses, but to Hamas as well, it's disconcerting. Canada is not in a good place right now.
Ryan, great to have you on. Thank you for that summary. Amazing. Fellow podcaster, always great to have a fellow colleague on our airs. Listen, you're very active on Twitter. You've had lots to say about the NDP and the left-wing support for the Palestinians. Challenge here is that many of us, common sense dictates that Palestinians likely deserve an opportunity to live peacefully under their own flag somewhere. Why the unhappiness and discontent with the New Democrats?
Well, so let me just go back to the point you made, John, about Palestinians having a right to exist and a place to call their own. I believe in a two-state solution. And I think a two-state solution is the way that we get to peace in this region. Unfortunately, Hamas does not. Hamas has no problem using its own civilians to shield itself from Israel. So let me get this completely upfront. Hamas knew that this was going to happen. They absolutely knew that when they went in on October 7th, they jumped across the border, they killed 1,200 Israeli citizens, they kidnapped some 300 others, and they still have hostages, by the way. They knew that what was going to happen was a retaliatory response. We would do the same thing. If we were attacked by the United States, absolutely we would have a retaliatory response. We should. We have the right to defend ourselves as much as Israel does. The difference is Hamas uses their own civilians and they use any kind of foreign aid that they might get, whether it's from UNRWA or whoever else it might be from, and they use that to support their efforts to attack Israel, bombard Israel, and they use their own citizens as human shields. So as far as I'm concerned, it is absolutely horrific, the death toll that has happened in Gaza. And nobody can look at that situation and say that it isn't. But it's Hamas that's responsible.
You know, we'll have Ryan back on our next show to talk more about his Zoom program and podcast and his gripes with the current political situation in Canada. So much rich ground to cover. But let's now shift from the Middle East to terrain closer to home, Robin. The anger across the country about the rising carbon tax.
Yes, we have gripes of our own on this show. John Pierre Poilievre and the National Conservative Party have been beating the drum to get rid of the carbon tax, and their Axe the Tax slogan has been gaining momentum and encouraging a lot of people across the country to get on board. And this has included the BC Conservative Party. They very loudly have been parroting what Pierre Poilievre has been saying, even though they are not officially part of the same party, and they have a fall election. Their numbers keep rising. For John Rustad and company, the tactic is working, especially if you look at this new poll that's out, the Liaison Strategy poll. And it was released in the first week of April, and it shows the BC NDP, David Eby's party, hanging on by 4 points over the rising BC Conservatives. Will this hold? Who knows? But it's fascinating to see. The BC NDP, 38% support of decided voters, 4 points behind BC Conservatives, 34% of decided voters, at least for now. BC United, the former BC Liberals, at 16%. They haven't turned things around yet. And the Green Party languishing at 11%. So, boy, it's really heartening, I'm sure, for a lot of BC Conservatives. The Axe the Tax thing is real.
You know, and it's startling for all of us who do this kind of thing at the speed at which this stuff changes. A month ago, Conservatives in BC and I were tied. I tell you, if you can believe the poll, and it's sometimes hard to when they move so dramatically, that the BC Conservatives could actually become the new official opposition party with even an outside chance of actually winning power. Oh my. Anyway, something that we will be following. As for the tax momentum, the only way to reverse it, in I think collectively all of our opinions, is to conclusively show that the tax has been successful in reducing emissions and actually cleaning the environment. At this point, the results are at best inconclusive.
And what I'm hearing is actually carbon is still increasing in this country. But let's take a look at the carbon tax and maybe break it down for what we're actually paying at the pumps. Make it a little bit clearer. I think we are always interested. We see those numbers rise. Where's it all coming from? Let's go to Vancouver first. Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, the most expensive place to buy gasoline in North America. The provincial excise tax, that's a sales tax, is at 8.5 cents per liter at the moment. Then you combine these taxes, the federal low carbon fuel standard and the provincial carbon tax, that symbolizes 34% of the 81 cents. That's collectively the carbon tax. Then the transit tax, which is for TransLink in Vancouver, it's quite a bit, 18.5%. Federal excise tax is 19.3 cents per liter. So that's how it all wraps up, but half of it is going towards battling carbon. And now we go to Victoria. Greater Victoria has the notoriety of being the second most expensive place to buy gasoline in North America at 78 cents per liter. That's how much added tax there is on what we're paying at the pumps right now. And the provincial excise tax, 14.5. That collective 34 cents paid towards the federal low carbon fuel standard and the provincial carbon tax. Victoria Transit is only 5.5 cents per liter, so it's a little bit less. That's why we pay less than Vancouver. And the additional federal taxes, the federal excise tax, which is 10% actually, and then the federal sales tax, which is a tax on tax of the federal excise tax, which is a further 9.3%. And so, in short, we're paying a lot of tax to pay for our gasoline. Colin Binda from the Taxpayers Federation is here. Let's zoom him in.
It's not in any way, shape, or form here in BC. So the carbon tax, when it was first introduced way back when, I think in 2008, under the then BC Liberals, it was revenue neutral for a very brief period, for a few years. So they offset the carbon tax revenue with tax cuts elsewhere, like income tax cuts. And that kept it revenue neutral, I think, until about 2014. Now in BC, it's nowhere near revenue neutral. To put it to put these numbers in context, the government's going to collect about $2.5 billion in carbon tax revenue this year, and they're only returning $1 billion back to taxpayers through rebates. So, that leaves $1.5 roughly billion of non-revenue neutrality on the table here with this carbon tax. And beyond that, let's take a look at the rebates here in BC. Your statistically average family, a family making the median income in our province, will not see a dime back in carbon tax rebates. So this is a tax that's hitting middle-class British Columbians very hard right now, especially middle-class British Columbians who live in rural communities, where everything that winds up on their grocery store shelves gets there on a truck that passes the carbon tax they're paying down to normal consumers. So the carbon tax hasn't been revenue neutral in BC for a long time. Our emissions are continuing to rise. In the past decade, they've gone up by about 2.5, 3 tons of carbon emissions provincially. So our emissions are going up. The rebates don't actually get to normal British Columbians. And it's seriously harming our economy. Right now, drivers in Vancouver, are the highest taxed in North America. We're paying about 81 cents per liter in the total tax burden for gasoline at the pump.
Robin, tax, getting a headache, taxes. Canadian Taxpayers Federation have long opposed big government and big debt. Big debt is being felt right now in so many ways. For example, we've just had 2 lending agencies downgrade BC's credit rating, making it more expensive to borrow. This is serious stuff. But there's another side to this argument from people who believe that big government is here to stay and that big government is good. And some of these folks write the Rumble Room on occasion.
They certainly do, John. A strong response we have from this is a result of Colin Binda's remarks, and we had some earlier Colin Binda remarks that we ran this week, and this picked the interest of Patrick, who wrote us talking about the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, saying they're just another propaganda rag funded by U.S. billionaires, fossil fuel oligarchs, and right-wing media outlets, all wanting to maintain the status quo. And he goes on to say, it's no surprise that Axe the Tax gains traction when it comes to rallying the support of the ignorant and uneducated against carbon pricing. Simple lies are always more appealing than complex truths, especially when they conveniently overlook the devastating consequences of climate change. The fascist Polyev may meddle these simplistic slogans, but let us not forget who is pulling the strings behind the scenes, as everything is for his wealthy donors and corporate masters.
Well, Patrick, tell us how you really feel. We also had a note from our good friend, realtor Kevin Singh. He's unhappy with the level of taxation directed towards housing, also the price of fuel. So as a counterpoint to Patrick, Kevin writes, the carbon tax and property purchase tax are incredibly inflationary and are totally part of the unaffordability of housing. Compounding increases on our already high taxes is crazy. All of the so-called experts shouting from their ivory towers that there's nothing to worry about and you'll save the planet are on the government payroll. Axe the tax and reduce the number of civil bureaucrats from almost 50% of Canada's workforce down to 30%.
And so once again, Victoria Rumble Room, we strive to bring balance to these issues and entertain as we do it, and lots of strong views expressed from every angle. We want to thank everyone who participates, send us notes, we read them, and we do try to bring them in when it's possible for the show. And I would mention this, when it comes to all this campaigning, it's really tough for a government, especially a government that wants to win an election, presumably, to be campaigning to raise taxes. It never seems to work. I think back to Brian Mulroney's time, back in the 80s when he brought in the GST and was pilloried. He had to run away. He didn't keep the GST going because he knew he would never win. Kim Campbell stepped in, waved the GST flag, and won 2 seats in Canada. Jean Chrétien campaigned against the GST. Once he won, he said, well, I think I'll keep the GST. So we still have it today. And then we had the BC Liberals. They wanted to bring in the harmonized sales tax. And boy, the HST, it's going to be great for the province and for our business. And then who comes in on a white horse? Bill Vander Zalm, the former premier, who had to leave as his position in government under a cloud. He comes back and he leads this anti-HST campaign. Well, we're going to stop the HST. And people think, great, we're going to vote against the tax because we don't want to pay tax. And it was thrown out and Gordon Campbell had to leave. So really now we have the situation where Justin Trudeau is saying we're going to bring in this carbon tax, we're going to clean up the environment, and people are getting fatigued with it. They are saying no mas. And so it's a real problem here. And on that note, John, let's swing over now to something else that's really going to get people jazzed up, the doctor shortage.
Thank you, Robin. Wonderful historical sort of evidence that too much tax is not going to work. Hey, a laugh a minute around these doctor shortage, which frankly is not lighthearted whatsoever. Over 800,000 British Columbians still don't have a family doctor. Health Minister Adrian Dix has made all kinds of concessions to get more family GPs practicing and get more medical students to choose family medicine. Things have improved, but are they coming fast enough?
Well, John, the Ipsos Reid research poll certainly gives you some pause on this issue. It took place at the end of March. Would you agree or disagree that private healthcare entrepreneurs can deliver services to patients faster than hospitals operated by government? And look at the answer. 70% agree with this statement. They're saying, yeah, I think entrepreneurs can do a better job. Only 15% disagree.
In the face of this overwhelming discontent, the NDP is moving forward with its doctor enrollment program. A new largely digital provincial registry will launch this month with the goal of speeding up the process of connecting patients to family doctors and nurse practitioners. There are already about 310,000 patients registered and waiting for a doctor. Now that's a list I wouldn't want to manage. They also claim that over 60,000 have now been attached to this registry because of the colon registry that's also now underway.
I would have no complaint if I felt this is really working well, and I'm sure the jury's out. They have this new high-tech engineered operation underway, and I really hope it works, because for a lot of us, it's been very frustrating. For example, I relocated to Victoria almost 5 years ago, still don't have a family doctor in Victoria, have clung on to my doctor in Vancouver, who I never see. I talk to him on the phone, but I had to have a doctor, but apparently because I have a doctor, I'm not at the front of the list. So will I get a doctor eventually? The jury's out, and certainly our healthcare system still needs a lot of fixing.
No kidding. Long lineups at emergencies are still the norm at BC hospitals. And now the latest headache, and this is this is a headache, is addicts sneaking hard drugs into their hospital beds and nurses and doctors needing to have Narcan kits handy. Can you believe where we're at? This is an extremely unsafe situation. Imagine if you had a family member in serious condition in hospital, and the next bed over was a junkie fixing up or smoking crack. These are crazy times, Rob.
Victoria lawyer David Busch, who has been on the show before, used to be a nurse. He used to work in the hospitals as a nurse before he went into the legal profession. He deplores what's happening in the hospitals today, and he believes we can't continue to allow addicts to be freely using their drugs in hospitals, but he also believes we need compulsory treatment centers for addicts, as well as long-term help for people with mental illness. And Bush says simply decriminalizing dangerous drugs and providing a safe supply is no solution to this terrible conundrum.
You don't imprison people because they're addicted to drugs. They need treatment beds. They need help.
But there are people that are also addicts that are also criminals. I mean, there's that overlap, right?
Now, with regards to criminals, the criminal behavior is very separate from that drug-seeking behavior. Now, they may commit crimes because they need to get money. It's the only way they get the money to get the drugs. That focuses in on the judges with regards to the sentencing. But the main bit is we need to get them that treatment. And perhaps if the only way to get them that treatment is by getting them into a treatment facility, we need whatever it takes to get them into that treatment facility. Let's do it, so that they can get off the streets and have a better quality of life.
We are rumbling along here, John, and before we sign off, I just want to say something about a person that I believe is a hero. And we live in a time right now where we don't put a lot of stock in heroes. We're ripping down heroes. We're taking statues away. We're toddling them over. And I think that people still deserve to be recognized for great moments in history. And this is one of these people. Commander Peter Chance served as a Canadian frigate officer on D-Day. And that's when the beaches were stormed. And it was the beginning of the end of Nazi Germany. He has lived a good, long life and has been able to talk about his achievements from the past. And there was courage, there was dedication, there was heroism. Peter Chance is emblematic of all of these things and all of these values. He resided for many years in Sydney by the Sea and has recently passed away at the age of 103. And all I can say is that he's the sort of person that I put up on a pedestal and say, this is a hero, and we honor him on the Rumble Room.
Absolutely, Robin. Thank you, Peter Chance. We salute you. And all of the men and women who've served our country in conflicts and emergency operations overseas. You bet. These are our heroes, and they've provided the foundation for us to do what we do today. Thank you. We also want to thank and applaud the many viewers for sticking with us as we bring you as many topics and issues as we possibly can. And they are coming in a dime a dozen, aren't they? Here's how you can follow us on a wide variety of platforms. Obviously, Facebook. That is our kind of, that's our main engine. Oh, that's kind of transferring to Twitter. Oh, sorry, X. Oh, sorry, Y. I don't know what it'll be 6 months from now. Everything we do is inventoried on YouTube. And also, you can listen to us on our podcast. And we also hang out on Instagram and TikTok, where we get lots of responses. So thank you. Robin, what a great show. Lots of interesting topics. Many, 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 many more ahead. For now, I remain your creation sensation, the king of Tulip Avenue in sunny Saanich, John Jurisic.
And I remain a virtual serf in your kingdom, John, a vassal, although I rarely vacillate. I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.